what are they going to look like under the status model? Say it again? And why are they going to look really good under the status model? The average is really high. Okay. Does everybody see that? What about under the growth model? How is that teacher going to look under the growth model? Oh, why is that? Right. They didn't move the scores that much. But these kids are really high at the ceiling. So we can see already that, you know, like, in a sense, like, you have to really understand kind of like where these various measures are going to have their shortcomings, right? What if instead we looked at kids who on average were scoring like 10 points on this exam, right? And then at the end of the class they're scoring like 25 points, right? How are these kids going to look under, how is the teacher or the school going to look under the status model? How's the teacher going to look under the status model?
Very bad.
Yeah, why is that?
Because all the students are getting 25s.
Exactly. But how's that teacher going to look under the growth model?
Good, because they went up by 15.
Right. And so, in a sense, there are strengths to each of these methods. And it's going to be really important when we think about accountability, this whole question of how are we measuring success. And this is kind of like kind of like a broad principle in economics, right? Like how you measure what you measure actually affects kind of like your interpretation of what the results are as well too. And so even as you do your project, like if you think about what kind of outcomes you want to measure for the effect of these laws on like women's labor force participation, like the variables that you choose to measure, this is going to be really important. Is it something like are you working versus not working, or is it something that are you getting a college degree versus a master's degree, right? Because one of these things might be very sensitive to the law, whereas another may not. Or both may be very sensitive to the law too, right? And so how you choose to measure the outcome is going to be extremely important. And so something like that too could be like a question that could be like on the exam, right? It could be like saying, okay, under a status model, what would this teacher look like under a growth model? How would this teacher look like? What are the strengths and the weaknesses of these two approaches? So that could be an example. So like with the second half of the course, I really want to get you into the mindset of like really thinking very conceptually.
I'll try not to do that on the whole lecture.
No.
I mentioned this last class, I don't know if that's a really question, but everything we've read kind of says that the value-added model is pretty inaccurate for measuring teacher quality, right? And yet we use those results to say how great the impact of high-quality teachers are on students. That is a really large contradiction. I'm having a hard time reconciling.
Yeah, measurement is hard. I mean, like, with respect to quality, right? And so, because in a lot of ways, like we just saw just now, it depends a lot on where you are in the distribution. It depends a lot on who is it that you want to impact. So there, in a sense, like the way that you should think about any of these results are that they're within the context of like whatever the assumptions are.
Right, but I mean, all the readings we had for the last class basically said these value-added models don't work. They're a very poor measure of teacher quality.
Yeah.
And the follow-up to that is look how great teacher quality is for student achievement. It's not really a contradiction.
No, I mean the way to the optimist in me says, look, this is an opportunity for you to make a contribution, right? And to come up with a better way to measure teacher quality. Because one of the things the value-added models do is they take into account the fact that students are starting at different places, right? And so in that sense, it's kind of like an improvement. We're just looking at kind of like where are the students living. One of the difficulties is that like the teacher's input is going to be a complement to so many other things that are happening, which we don't observe. Like what's happening at home with the parents. Because you can be the most amazing teacher, but like if the parents don't give a rep, the kid goes home and never opens the book, like doesn't bring the requisite resources to school. And so a big part of it is like what can we actually observe about the students in addition to the teacher quality. So that's one thing. The second thing too is you can take the other tack, which is really to say, okay, we are not going to be able to observe like a ton of things about these students. Right? So this is going to be these estimates of value added models, like very unreliable. How can we come up with something that's more robust to the fact that we don't observe all of these things? And that's a huge open question. Like, if you should definitely think about it, and if you have some ideas, we should talk about them. And who knows, maybe a paper can come out of this, and like we can be like, we can have like the first model. Yeah. Yeah. Whenever you see somebody doing something poorly, like it's an opportunity for you to do it better. And then
Something to do this weekend.
well, I mean, you are sending emails at like 5 o'clock in the morning, so I mean, you're pretty productive. And the email did come in at 5 o'clock this morning. I'm gonna double check on that. But in all seriousness, do think about this, and if you come up with an idea, like let's talk about it. Okay. So let's look. Bless you. Okay, so what's the name of the game going to be here, right? So the name of the game is going to be how do we provide incentives to make sure that schools are meeting these barriers, meeting these thresholds. Now, in terms of the accountability component of this is going to look like the following. Okay, so what does accountability look like? The first step is to measure performance. The second step is to compare it to a benchmark. And then the third step is going to be consequences for not meeting that benchmark. Consequences for not meeting the benchmark. Or rewards meeting or exceeding the benchmark. Now, in particular, so under No Child Left Behind, each state is going to have to produce these adequate, each state is going to have to produce these reports of adequate yearly progress, right? And what's going to happen is if a given school misses its benchmarks for 2 years in a row, it's going to be designated as in need of improvement. If it misses that benchmark for a third year, then there's going to be a requirement for students at that school to have tutoring. If it misses for a fourth consecutive year, then there could be something like some curriculum changes or some replacement of staff. And if they miss benchmarks for a fifth year, then it's going to require a restructuring plan. And if even after the restructuring plan, the school still misses those benchmarks, those schools will get shuttered. And under No Child Left Behind, a number of those schools got shuttered. And the intuition behind that was these schools have been given ample time to change through a series of opportunities, and they haven't changed, and so they're not really serving the interests of students, so they should be closed. And we should not be sending students to fill the school. So this was the whole big idea behind No Child Left Behind. So we had these adequate yearly progress assessments. AYEs. Okay, right. AYEs. benchmarks designed by the state. To reach the No Child Left Behind 2014 goal. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write out what were the consequences of missing these AYPs across the different years. And then after we finish that, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some ways in which some schools try to game the system. So if you miss AYP for 2 years, what's going to happen is you're going to be labeled as an even encroachment. And if you miss it for 3 years consecutively, give you guys a moment to catch up. And let me know if I'm writing too quickly. I don't want you to. So if you miss for 3, if you miss AYP, consecutive time. Then the consequence is going to be that you're going to be required to provide tutoring to students. And then if you miss your AYP, 4 consecutive times. There'll be an introduction. Of school solutions. Have some curriculum and staff changes as well. Some people got fired. That's a nice way of saying this.
Hired, you get hired anywhere else.
No,
Sure.
the
Easy
problem is that they probably can't get hired somewhere else.
Easy to replace too.
Yeah. And so if you miss your AYP for 5 consecutive years, the consequence is that you'll be required to create a restructuring plan. So this is like you're starting to go into like some kind of managed bankruptcy, right? If you can't get out of this, then it's over. Okay. And if you miss your AYP for 6 consecutive years, the restructuring plan is implemented. Which could result in either one of just give you guys a moment to write that up. So this is basically going through like what the accountability is. So what we talked about first is we have to come up with a way to measure performance. There are two ways that we can choose to measure performance. One could be the status model, where we really look at what's the average performance of the students. Another one is this growth model, where we look at the year-to-year improvement for a given student and what's the average growth rate of that school. Right? No Child Left Behind is going to focus a lot more on the status model, which is what's the average level of attainment for students. Right? And once we have this way to measure what performance is, we compare it to a benchmark. And so the benchmark was really by 2014 to have 100% of students in schools being proficient. Right? And in order to do that, there were these adequate yearly progress assessments that were being done at each school within each state. And if a school was not able to meet these benchmarks, there are consequences, which we outlined. So in year one, if you didn't meet, after 2 years, if you didn't meet it, you were just given a label. In year three, the consequences are a bit more severe, or you're required to provide these additional services. In year four, then we have these school sanctions, potentially even layoffs. Year five, you have to come up with a plan just in case things don't work out after year five. And then in year six, that plan is actually implemented. This plan is the end of that school in its current incarnation, with that school being taken away by the state, by a charter school, or just being completely shuttered. So this is like the accountability plan. Okay. So there are a couple of studies that have been, yeah.
I had a question. I don't remember correctly, but wasn't one of the controversial things about it was that if the school was deemed inadequate because of the whole incentive program, they weren't getting resources and funds in order to improve?
Yes.
Okay. So then, how were they expected to improve?
That's a good question, right? And so let's explore this. Let's explore this. So the point that you're making. So what would you propose instead?
I don't know. I was just.
But do you think that that was a problem? Was that what made?
I remember
what made,
hearing that. I don't.
But you put on your hat as an economist. So in your view, what's right or what's wrong with taking away resources and funding from schools that are failing? Make the case for what's right about it. Make the case for what's wrong about it. Both ways.
What's wrong about it is that how can you be expected to improve without any more funding or resources or books, computers, improved teacher salary? What's good about it? I don't know. I don't think you can't make a case for anything that is good.
Okay. No, that's fair. Can anybody make a case for why?
If the resources aren't successful in that school, they may be more efficiently used in another school that does a good job of creating good student outcomes.
Yeah. Right. And there's another reason to why this might be. You might want to take resources away.
Incentive to do well and cheat in the first place. Just do well in the first place.
Hold. Say that again.
There's the incentive to do well in the first place if you know having that label will remove your resources and make it that much more difficult to do well. Give the incentive to do well to get them.
I see. So this is the punishment. This is the stick. Is what you're saying. Right.
There's the incentive to do well.
Yeah. So there's just allocative. So what you say is exactly. You can certainly make this point, right? Which is really, if you take resources from a school that's failing, it's not clear that this is going to turn the school around because they need the resources and inputs to produce, right? And then on the flip side, you can say, well, they aren't using the resources to produce, so why shouldn't we take these resources and place them elsewhere? Or why shouldn't we incentivize them with making their job even harder, right? So this is I don't know if you guys are familiar with this is the biblical story of Moses, where the Israelites are supposed to be making basically bricks. And then Pharaoh makes it hard, and he's like, okay, no more straw for you, have to go and fetch your own straw. And it just makes it harder and harder and harder because they're complaining about how hard it is to do their job. It's like, okay, you think your job is hard now? We're going to take away some of these resources and make it even harder. The point of this whole discussion is the following. As economists, you always want to think about what are the effects that a given incentive can have. Right? Because with this specific one, you can see how you can come up with stories one way or the other way. And then the key thing becomes, how do we test this empirically? So there is a paper, this is Chakrabarty, that looks, Chakrabarty 2014, and this paper what the authors do is they look at schools that have one annual yearly progress failure. And so this school is really like on the precipice of like going down this kind of dark road. And they look to see if these schools do in fact turn around, right? So you can look at, and what they do find is that these schools tended to focus a lot more on the high stakes tests. And they tended to focus a bit more on the high school tests, and then they did see some kind of improvements. One of the things that's very interesting about this literature is you get a lot of really mixed results. Like, very few things seem to work very consistently across the board. And that's what makes this a very important area to do research in, because we just don't really know exactly what works. The other component to it too is like so many things can be bundled together, right? Like you have, it could be bad teachers, it could be bad teachers and like parents that don't care. It could be bad teachers and parents that don't care, and administrators who are really hands off as well. And like being able to separately isolate which one of these things are causing students to fail is like really difficult to do. And if you change any one of them, you can have a situation where you get these kind of cascade effects too. And so what I hope for you to take away from this course really is the ability to kind of like think through not just what the intention of them was, but also what are some of the unintended consequences. And let's talk about that, actually. Let's talk about, so what are some of the things that people can do to game the system? So you're a teacher. You're being measured based on what your students are doing on average under No Child Left Behind.
Maybe you could make a curve so those students do what they actually do.
Well, let's say it's a standardized test. So you're not making the curve, but the curve is natural. But what you're saying is the teacher can influence the outcome. Like, what are some other ways that the teacher can influence the outcome?
Help the students on the test.
Exactly. Talk a bit more about that.
Well, wasn't there a case in Atlanta where the teachers and administrators would just, instead of actually telling students like the answers, they would, after they took the test, they'd go back and change the answers for them in order to get more money?
Yeah, so teachers could cheat. There's a paper by Steve Levitt and co-authors. Let's see if I can. Yeah, that's Jacob and Levitt, 2004. So how can you? Let's do this. So how can teachers game the system? Cheating. Basically helping the students on the test. This is the paper by Levitt and Jacobson. Jacob and Levitt, rather. This is with Chicago Public Schools. Okay. What are some other things that teachers can do in the system?
Teaching to the test.
They can teach to the test. What does that mean, to teach to the test?
Teach only the concepts and ideas you know are going to be on that standardized test and forget everything else. Working more in silver
And which subjects are being tested under No Child Left Behind? Right. And so what can they do?
Ignore art, or science, or social studies.
And is that actually good? Why is that not good?
It pays to be a well-rounded citizen, and some of those other skills.
Exactly. So they can ignore subjects that are not tested, for example, science, and for the subjects that are tested, only focus on material to be tested. This piece of ignoring subjects that are not tested, that's what kind of, that's like an adjustment on the extensive or the intensive margin. Oh, sorry. Is that an adjustment on the extensive or the intensive margin? The extensive. Why is it an adjustment on the extensive margin? Because, okay. So, by only teaching, so for a subject that is tested, this is the other side of it. For a subject that is tested, by only focusing on the things that will be tested, that's an intensive margin adjustment, right? Because it's like a conditional on being, teaching something that's about the test that's going to be measured. You change what you study. Okay. So this is the way to think about extensive and intensive, right? This is math. This is science. Like, is science tested? No. Okay. Is everything in math tested? No. So only this stuff here in math is tested, right? And so math is tested, but only this stuff is tested. So if they only focused on this stuff here, it's like conditional on math being tested, they only focus on the things within math that are tested. So this is like intensive margin. These are the things that are in math, right? The extensive margin, it's like they were teaching science, but they stopped teaching this. This is like outside of like what is being tested, and so it just gets ignored. Does that make sense? I like to always bring this up because this is a bit of jargon that economists tend to use, but it's also a very useful way to think about it too, right? Because whenever you have a problem and you're trying to think about how somebody can game a system, what can they do on the intensive margin, right? They still have to teach math, but then they can skimp on only teaching the things that are going to be on the test. They didn't really, I mean, science isn't going to be tested at all, so they can just completely ignore it. Okay. What are some other ways that they can game the system? What are some other ways that schools can game the system? What are they being measured on? What's being measured? What is the government measuring? They're measuring the average performance, right? And how do we compute the average? Say that again? How do we compute the average? We just add everybody up and then divide by n. So if we wanted to manipulate the average, what's a way of manipulating the average?